The clash was unavoidable because of the English crown. After King Edward the Confessor died without naming a clear heir, Harold Godwinson took the throne with the support of the Anglo-Saxon nobles. Across the Channel, however, William of Normandy claimed the crown based on an old promise and the approval of the Pope. There was no longer any path for diplomacy. Power would be decided by spear and shield on English soil. William landed on the southern coast of England in late September 1066, setting up camp near Hastings. He built temporary wooden fortifications to secure the beach and use it as a base. Harold, who had just defeated a Norwegian army at Stamford Bridge, was forced to march south at once. The Anglo-Saxon army was exhausted, but they had no choice. If William was allowed to strengthen his position, England would be lost. On the morning of October 14, the two armies faced each other on the slopes of Senlac Hill. Harold took the high ground, with a forest at his back and a valley in front of him. He formed a solid shield wall. Heavy Anglo-Saxon infantry stood shoulder to shoulder, round shields overlapping, Danish axes and spears pointing forward. They had no cavalry and very few archers. Their strength lay in holding their ground and stopping every charge. William deployed his army at the foot of the hill. The Norman force was divided into three wings: Normans in the center, Bretons on the left, and Franco-Flemish troops on the right. Archers stood in front of the cavalry, with infantry behind them. The terrain was against them. The slope was steep and slippery, but William had to break the shield wall. The sound of horns rang out. The archers moved forward and loosed a rain of arrows straight up the hillside. Arrows struck wooden shields, bounced off and slid down. The angle was too low, and the slope drained their force. The shield wall did not move. William signaled the infantry to advance. Blocks of Norman soldiers climbed the hill and slammed into the Anglo-Saxon shields. Metal crashed against wood. Axes struck helmets. The lines locked together. The Saxons held the high ground and pushed back every attack. Norman cavalry was sent in. Horses charged uphill, but the shield wall did not open. Many knights were pulled from their saddles and killed on the spot. On the left wing, the Breton troops fell into disorder and began to retreat into the valley. A rumor spread quickly. William was dead. This was the most dangerous moment. If the Norman army collapsed, the invasion would end. William rode forward, lifted his helmet so his face could be seen, and shouted to rally his men. He gathered the cavalry and stopped the collapse. Then, amid the dust and noise, a tactical decision emerged. A feigned retreat. The left wing turned and ran in controlled order. The shield wall on the hilltop, disciplined until now, cracked for the first time. Some young Saxon warriors chased after them downhill. William waited for the right moment. The cavalry turned back and smashed into the scattered groups that had broken formation. Small gaps began to form along the hillside. Not enough for a full breakthrough, but enough to try again. Archers were ordered to fire high, sending arrows in long arcs that fell from above. Shields held in front no longer gave full protection. Cries of pain rose from behind the shield wall. The battle changed rhythm. No longer one unmoving wall, but many constant clashes, where Norman cavalry searched for every opening. The sun climbed higher. Sweat, blood, and crushed grass covered the slopes of Senlac. Both sides were still locked in combat, but the shape of the battle had begun to change slowly, dangerously, and in a way that cured defense could no longer reverse. By midday, the fight had become brutally intense. Senlac Hill was no longer a single slope, but broken into slippery strips of mud and blood. The Anglo-Saxon shield wall still stood, but it was no longer straight. Small gaps appeared where warriors had chased downhill and never returned. Harold was forced to pull units from the rear to fill the holes, turning the once solid formation into something uneven and hard to control. William watched carefully. He no longer sent in mass cavalry charges like in the morning. Attacks now came in rhythm. Infantry moved in to hold the line. Archers fired high. Then cavalry charged exactly where arrows had disrupted the shield wall. There was no single decisive strike, just steady grinding, meter by meter. On the Norman right wing, heavy cavalry began deliberate feigned retreats. They turned and fled slowly, tempting pursuit. Saxon warriors, believing the enemy was weakening, broke formation to chase them. As soon as they reached the foot of the slope, the Norman cavalry wheeled around, closed ranks, and lowered their lances. On flat ground, Saxon infantry lost their advantage and were quickly cut down. Bodies lay scattered across the valley, forming obstacles that made retreat even harder for those who followed. Harold tried to maintain discipline. He sent orders to stand firm and not pursue, but the battle had already lasted for hours. The FARD local militia were exhausted. Shields felt heavier, hands shook, and each block came slower than the last. Elite housecarls still held the center, their Danish axes smashing spears and horses, but there were not enough of them to seal every gap. In mid-afternoon, William launched a coordinated assault. Archers moved closer and fired dense volleys, arrows falling almost straight down. Many Saxon shields held forward were useless now. Men in the rear were struck in the face, neck, and thighs. As the line wavered to pull the wounded back, Norman cavalry surged forward. This time they did not try to climb straight to the top, but attacked from the sides, widening existing cracks. The Anglo-Saxon line was pushed back step by step. It was not a rout, but a slow, painful slide. Every step cost blood. Harold remained at the center, the royal banner still flying, trying to hold morale together. But control of the battlefield was slipping away. William moved constantly along the line, sending cavalry where progress was made and pulling them back where resistance was strongest. This flexibility stood in sharp contrast to the fixed position of the army on the hill. As the sun sank toward the west, the shield wall was no longer a single formation. It had become many small defensive clusters, each fighting alone, with no space to rotate shields or replace fallen men. The Normans recognized this and focused their strength on the center where Harold stood. The mounting pressure signaled that a decisive moment was approaching. Late afternoon, weak sunlight slanted across the hillside, blinding those still standing in the broken shield wall. There was no longer a clear line between front and rear. The wounded could not retreat, and the unhurt had no room to advance. Shields overlapped, boots stepped on corpses and bloody mud, and every movement felt like dragging the body through deep water. William knew time was on his side. The Norman army could still rotate fresh troops. He ordered the archers forward again, despite the danger. The final volleys were fired at the highest angle. Arrows fell straight onto the hilltop, slipping through gaps where helmets were dented and shields split. The sound of metal striking bone echoed again and again. The Anglo-Saxon center reeled. Then Norman infantry surged forward not to break through at once, but to pin the enemy in place. As the infantry locked together, cavalry appeared on both flanks, striking into scattered defensive groups. There was no true shield wall left, only small bands of Saxon warriors, backs pressed together, fighting in desperation. At the center, Harold still stood. The royal banner was still there, but around him the number of elite housecarls had fallen sharply. Danish axes swung more slowly, no longer strong enough to cut down horse and rider as they had in the morning. An arrow fell from above and struck Harold in the face. He collapsed. There was no great shout, no final command. But the moment spread quickly across the battlefield. Anglo-Saxon morale collapsed almost instantly. Not from cowardice, but because their only anchor was gone. Some groups continued fighting around the king's body and were surrounded and destroyed by Norman cavalry. Others began to fall back downhill, then turned and fled. William immediately ordered pursuit. Cavalry chased them down, cutting down those who slipped on the slope, killing without mercy to prevent any regrouping. When the sun touched the horizon, Senlac Hill was completely in Norman hands. The battle, which had lasted nearly a full day, ended in heavy silence. There was no more clash of shield and spear, only the groans of the wounded and the sound of horses breathing. Anglo-Saxon bodies covered the hillside, thickest at the center where the shield wall had once seemed unbreakable. William ordered the pursuit to stop when darkness fully fell. He controlled the battlefield not through one single decisive blow, but through cold, steady pressure, exploiting every small mistake and every misstep of the enemy. The Battle of Hastings did not end when the arrow struck Harold. It had already been decided the moment the shield wall began to crack and could no longer be repaired. England entered a new era on that blood-soaked hillside.